Have you ever felt the weight of 100 eyes on you, while simultaneously feeling completely invisible? That's the peculiar torture of being the outsider, the one who doesn't belong. And in the brutal ecosystem of high school, invisibility isn't protection. It's a target painted on your back. The fluorescent lights of Oakmont Academy's dining hall cast harsh shadows across rows of tables packed with teenagers who had already divided themselves into their comfortable tribes. The athletes claimed the center tables, their voices booming across the space. The drama club kids gestured wildly near the windows. The honor students hunched over textbooks while stealing bites of food. And everywhere, phones glowed like little fires, illuminating faces absorbed in digital worlds that felt safer than the real ones surrounding them. Vera Mitchell sat at the corner table closest to the emergency exit, a position she'd chosen deliberately during her first day at this school. Always know where the exits are. One of many lessons her father had drilled into her before cancer took him 3 years ago. Her mother had followed him into death just 6 months later, her heart simply giving up, the doctors said. But Vera knew better. Her mother had died of grief, of a broken heart that modern medicine had no cure for. Now she lived with her Aunt Rachel in this new town, this new school, this new life that felt like wearing someone else's clothes. Everything slightly wrong, nothing quite fitting. She'd been at Oakmont for exactly 9 days, and in those 9 days, she'd perfected the art of being present while absent, there but not there, visible yet unseen. Her lunch sat untouched on the tray before her, a turkey sandwich that tasted like cardboard, an apple she wouldn't eat, a carton of milk she'd opened but hadn't drunk. Her hands moved across the pages of her leather-bound journal, a graduation gift from her father that she'd managed to keep through 2 moves and countless bad days. The pencil scratched softly against paper as she sketched, losing herself in the only place she felt safe anymore, inside the world she created with graphite and imagination. The drawing taking shape beneath her fingers showed a girl standing on a cliff edge, wind whipping her hair, lightning crackling in the sky behind her. The girl's stance was defiant, powerful, facing down an approaching storm with no fear in her eyes. Vera didn't need a therapist to tell her what the drawing meant. She knew she was drawing herself, or at least the version of herself she wished she could be. The noise of the cafeteria washed over her like ocean waves, constant, overwhelming, impossible to escape. Laughter erupted from nearby tables. Someone dropped a tray with a crash that made half the room flinch. A girl shrieked about something on her phone. Boys shouted about last night's game. Through it all, Vera kept her head down, her pencil moving, her breathing steady. She'd learned this survival strategy years ago, back at her previous school where being quiet meant being forgotten, and being forgotten meant safety. But what she hadn't learned yet was that some predators are attracted specifically to prey that tries to hide. Across the dining hall, 3 boys sat at a table they'd claimed as their throne since freshman year. Derek Vaughan, Brandon Cole, and Kyle Martinez, known collectively as the Pack by students who were smart enough to give them a wide berth. They weren't the biggest guys at Oakmont, nor the most athletic. What made them dangerous was something else entirely. They understood the social currency of cruelty, and they traded in it daily. Derek, with his expensive sneakers and carefully styled hair, was the ringleader. He had the kind of face that adults found charming. Quick smile, polite when teachers were around, always ready with a joke. But students knew better. They'd seen what he was capable of when authority figures weren't watching. Brandon served as Derek's echo, amplifying whatever cruelty the leader initiated. He was shorter, stockier, with a laugh that sounded like barking and eyes that never quite looked at you directly, always assessing, always calculating. Kyle was the quietest of the 3, which somehow made him the most unsettling. He watched people the way cats watch birds, patient and focused, waiting for exactly the right moment to pounce. They'd already noticed the new girl during her first week. How could they not? She was different from the others, not trying to fit in, not attempting to join any cliques, not even bothering to pretend she cared about belonging. To most students, she was simply part of the background noise. But to Derek, Brandon and Kyle, she represented opportunity. "Look at her," Derek muttered, nodding toward Vera's corner table. 9 days, and she's still eating alone. Not even trying. Brandon followed his gaze, a smirk spreading across his face. "Maybe she thinks she's too good for everyone. You know the type, acts all mysterious and damaged. She's always drawing in that book," Kyle added, his voice flat. "Like she's recording everything. Creepy." Derek leaned back in his chair, studying Vera with the intensity of someone planning something. The cafeteria had been boring lately. The usual targets had either graduated, transferred, or learned to laugh along with the jokes at their expense, which took all the fun out of it. But this new girl, with her second-hand clothes and her silence and her obvious vulnerability, she was fresh meat. "You know what I think," Derek said, his voice taking on that particular tone his friends recognized as the prelude to entertainment. "I think someone needs to welcome her properly to Oakmont. Show her how things work around here." Brandon's grin widened. "Yeah? What did you have in mind?" "Nothing too harsh. Just a little fun. Remind her that sitting alone, acting all superior, pretending we don't exist, that's not how it works here." Kyle's eyes never left Vera. "When?" Derek checked his phone, calculating. The cafeteria was packed today, maximum audience. The lunch monitors were distracted, dealing with some freshman spill near the beverage station. Perfect timing. "Now," he said simply, standing up. The other two followed immediately, like sharks responding to blood in the water. Several students noticed the movement, and a subtle shift rippled through the cafeteria. When the pack moved with purpose, something was about to happen. People leaned back, giving them space. Conversations dropped to whispers. A few pulled out phones, ready to record whatever came next. Vera remained oblivious, lost in her drawing. She'd added more detail to the storm now, making the lightning fork across the entire sky, making the wind visible through the bend of distant trees. The girl on the cliff had her arms outstretched, not in surrender but in challenge, as if daring the storm to do its worst. She didn't notice the sudden quiet spreading through her section of the cafeteria. Didn't see the three boys approaching, didn't feel the shift in atmosphere that everyone else suddenly sensed. Not until Derek's hand slammed down on her table, making her pencil jump and drag an ugly line across her carefully crafted drawing. The sound was like a gunshot in the sudden silence. Vera's head snapped up, her heart immediately hammering. Three boys surrounded her table, forming a triangle that blocked her view of the rest of the cafeteria. They were all bigger than her, all standing while she remained seated, a deliberate power play she recognized instantly. "Well, well, well," Derek drawled, his voice carrying across the quiet dining hall. "The mysterious new girl." "We've been wondering about you." Vera said nothing. Every instinct her father had trained into her screamed danger. But years of learned helplessness, of trying to be small and unnoticed, kept her frozen in her seat. She could feel the stares of dozens of students, could sense the collective anticipation in the air. Brandon leaned over, invading her space, his breath smelling like onions and poor decisions. "You deaf or something? Derek's talking to you. That's considered an honor around here." "We're just curious," Kyle added, his flat voice somehow worse than the others' obvious aggression. "You've been here over a week and you haven't talked to anyone." "That's weird. That's antisocial. Some might say it's rude." Derek reached out and flicked the edge of her journal, making pages flutter. "What's in the book? What are you always writing? Planning to shoot up the school or something?" The accusation was so absurd, so calculated to paint her as the problem, that Vera finally found her voice. "No," she said quietly. I'm just drawing. Just drawing, Derek repeated mockingly, his voice pitched high in imitation. Did you guys hear that? She's just drawing. Nothing weird about sitting alone every single day, refusing to talk to anyone, scratching away in a book like some kind of psycho. Laughter rippled through the nearby tables. Not everyone, but enough. Enough to fuel what was coming next. Vera felt her face burning, felt the familiar sting behind her eyes that she'd trained herself to suppress. Don't cry, don't ever cry where they can see you. Tears are blood in the water. Come on, Brandon said, making a grab for the journal. Let's see what's so important. Vera's hand shot out instinctively, clamping down on the book. For a moment there was a small tug of war, and then Brandon let go suddenly, making her hand slam back against the table. More laughter. She could hear phones clicking, capturing this moment for posterity, for social media, for eternal humiliation. Oh, protective of it, Kyle observed. Must be something really good in there. Maybe she's writing love letters. To herself, probably, since nobody else wants her. Derek picked up her untouched apple and tossed it casually from hand to hand. Here's what I don't get. You move to a new school, new town, fresh start, and you choose to be a loser, like actively choose it? That's fascinating from a psychological standpoint. He punctuated his words by biting into her apple, chewing slowly, mockingly. Then he dropped it on the floor and stepped on it, grinding his expensive sneaker into the fruit until it was pulp and juice spreading across the tile. Oops, he said, grinning. Guess you weren't hungry anyway. Something inside Vera shifted at that moment. It wasn't the apple, wasn't even the public humiliation. It was the casual destruction of something that belonged to her, the assumption that they had the right to take what was hers and destroy it while everyone watched. She'd seen it before, this particular brand of cruelty, had experienced it at her last school and the one before that. Different faces, same script. But what these boys didn't know, what none of them could know, was who Vera had been before grief had hollowed her out. Her father had been military, then private security, then a self-defense instructor before the cancer. He'd believed in preparation, in readiness, in never being a victim. From the time she could walk, he'd trained her, not because he wanted her to fight, but because he'd seen too much of the world's darkness and refused to let it swallow his daughter without her having the skills to resist. Jiu-jitsu twice a week from age 7 to 15, Krav Maga whenever he could find a class, boxing at the local gym where old fighters treated her like a mascot until they saw her actually train. Her father had made it fun, made it a game, made it about confidence and capability rather than violence. When he got sick, the training had intensified, his way of preparing her for a world where he wouldn't be there to protect her. Her mother had protested at first, worried about the bruises, the intensity. But she'd come to understand what her husband knew. The world wasn't safe, and wishing it were didn't make it so. Vera had been good, better than good. She'd competed in junior tournaments, won medals she kept in a box she never opened anymore. The skills were still there, buried beneath layers of grief and deliberate passivity. She'd stopped training when her father died, couldn't bring herself to continue what had been their special thing. After her mother's death, she'd packed away the fighting with everything else from her old life. She'd promised herself she would be different here, quiet, unnoticed, safe. Violence, even defensive violence, only created more problems. Better to endure, to outlast, to survive until graduation and escape. That had been the plan, but plans, as her father used to say, rarely survive contact with reality. Derek reached for her journal again, this time getting his fingers on it. Let's see what secret genius artwork we're dealing with here. He pulled it free from her weakening grip and held it up, flipping pages randomly while Brandon and Kyle crowded close. The cafeteria had gone completely silent now, 100 students watching this unfold like a nature documentary, predators and prey, the ancient dance. Some looked uncomfortable, but did nothing. Most looked entertained. A few looked relieved it wasn't happening to them. Derek stopped on a particular page, and his expression shifted slightly. The drawing showed a woman standing over a grave, head bowed, rain falling around her. It was raw, emotional, obviously personal. For just a second, even Derek seemed to recognize he was looking at something private, something that mattered. Then Brandon laughed, breaking the moment. "Oh man, is this like a death fantasy thing?" "That's dark." Kyle grabbed the book from Derek, studying the image. "She draws dead people. Definitely a psycho. Give it back." Vera's voice was quiet, but something in her tone made nearby students lean forward. Derek heard it too, that subtle shift, but misread it as weakness, as the breaking point before tears. "Or what? You gonna tell a teacher? Gonna cry?" He grabbed the journal from Kyle and held it high above his head, out of Vera's reach. "Come on, new girl. Show some spirit. Fight for it. Or are you too much of a coward?" Brandon picked up her sandwich and threw it on the floor, stepping on it the same way Derek had destroyed her apple. "She doesn't need food anyway. Probably too sad to eat. Too busy being a little emo artist." The laughter was louder now, more people joining in. This was entertainment, a story they'd tell later, another reason to be grateful they weren't the target. Vera could feel the weight of it, the collective cruelty that came from being part of a crowd rather than standing alone. Kyle leaned in close, his voice dropping to a stage whisper everyone could still hear. "You know what I think? I think she has no friends, because there's something wrong with her. Normal people don't act like this. Normal people don't sit alone drawing disturbing pictures." "I think you're right," Derek agreed, still holding the journal out of reach. He opened it to another page, this one showing a warrior woman with a sword, facing down multiple enemies. His smirk faltered for just a second. The skill was obvious, the power in the image undeniable. Then he recovered. "Look at this. She fantasizes about being some kind of fighter. That's sad, like really sad." He held the image up for others to see, and more laughter rippled through the crowd. Vera could feel her fingernails digging into her palms, could feel something hot and dangerous rising in her chest, the storm from her drawing gathering inside her. Brandon reached out and tore a page from the journal, just ripped it right out, the sound of tearing paper cutting through the noise. "Oops," he said, letting it flutter to the floor. "Guess your little fantasy isn't as tough as you imagined." That's when Vera stood up. The movement was sudden enough that Derek actually took a step back. She wasn't tall, maybe 5'5" in her worn sneakers, but something about the way she rose to her feet made the three boys recalibrate. Her eyes, which had been downcast and avoiding, now locked onto Derek's face with an intensity that made him uncomfortable in a way he didn't quite understand. "Give it back." Each word was separate, distinct, carrying a weight that silenced the nearby laughter. Derek recovered his confidence, feeding off the crowd's attention. "Make me!" The cafeteria held its breath. This was the moment everyone lived for in high school. The breaking point, the confrontation, the spectacle. Phones were definitely recording now, dozens of them, ready to capture whatever happened next for immediate upload, dissemination, immortalization. Vera's hand moved. It wasn't aggressive, wasn't a swing or a push. She simply reached out, calm and controlled, and plucked the journal from Derek's raised hand before he realized what was happening. The movement was so fluid, so unexpected, that he was left standing there with his arms still raised, grasping empty air. "What the?" he started, but Vera was already tucking the journal under her arm, her stance shifting in a way that looked casual but was actually deeply deliberate. Her weight balanced on the balls of her feet, her center of gravity low, her breathing steady. Brandon noticed it first. some instinct he couldn't name, telling him this wasn't going the way it was supposed to. Derek. But Derek's ego was already bruised by the surprise of having something taken from him instead of the other way around. He stepped forward aggressively, invading Vera's space, using his size advantage. "You think that was smart? You think you can just—" He reached out to shove her shoulder, the kind of casual aggressive move he'd made 1,000 times to establish dominance. But this time, his hand never connected. Vera moved, not away, not back. She shifted slightly, redirecting his force, a basic principle of jiu-jitsu that her father had drilled into her thousands of times. Derek's shove met empty air, his momentum carrying him slightly off balance. It was subtle enough that most people missed it, but Kyle and Brandon saw, and something in their expressions changed. "Did she just—" Brandon started. "Don't be stupid," Derek snapped, but he was less certain now. He squared up again, his hands coming up in what he probably thought was an intimidating posture. "Last chance, freak. Apologize for being weird, for wasting our time, and maybe we let this go." Vera looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time since she'd arrived at Oakmont Academy, she felt something other than grief and exhaustion. She felt the muscle memory of hundreds of training sessions, felt her father's voice in her head, never start a fight, but always finish one. She felt 9 days of silent endurance, of making herself small, of believing that invisibility equaled safety. And she felt something else. The realization that safety was an illusion, that no amount of silence would protect her, that predators would always find prey unless the prey learned to bare their teeth. "No," she said quietly. The single syllable hung in the air like a grenade, with the pin pulled. Derek's face flushed red. Around them, students leaned forward, sensing that whatever was about to happen would be talked about for the rest of the year. Brandon and Kyle moved to flank Vera, forming a triangle that trapped her against the table. "Wrong answer," Derek said, and reached for her again. This time, Vera didn't just redirect. This time, she responded. Her hand caught his wrist mid-reach, a grip that looked gentle but applied pressure to exactly the right points. Derek's smirk vanished, replaced by a flash of genuine pain. Before he could react, Vera twisted, a basic Aikido move that spun Derek's arm in a way it wasn't designed to go. Not enough to injure, but enough to send him stumbling sideways, off balance, completely controlled by the small girl he'd thought was an easy target. The cafeteria gasped, a collective intake of breath that sounded like wind through trees. Brandon, operating on instinct and loyalty rather than thought, grabbed for Vera's shoulder. She dropped slightly, slipping his grip while simultaneously bringing her elbow up into his solar plexus. Not hard enough to truly injure, but definitely hard enough to knock the wind out of him. Brandon made a wheezing sound and staggered back, eyes wide with shock. Kyle was smarter than his friends. He saw Derek stumbling, saw Brandon gasping for air, and recalculated. This wasn't what they'd signed up for. This wasn't how the script was supposed to go. Vera stood in the center of where the 3 boys had been, her journal tucked under her arm, her breathing steady, her stance relaxed but ready. She looked at each of them in turn, and her eyes held something they'd never expected to see. Not fear, not submission, but a quiet, dangerous calm. "I said no," she repeated, her voice carrying across the absolutely silent cafeteria. "I'm done being invisible so you feel powerful. I'm done being your entertainment. I'm just trying to make it through the day without falling apart, and you couldn't even leave me that." Derek had recovered his balance, his face now bright red with humiliation and anger. 100 phones were recording his failure. This would be everywhere within minutes. His reputation, carefully cultivated over 3 years, was crumbling in real time. "You're dead," he hissed, moving toward her again. "You have no idea what you just—" A voice cut through the tension like a knife. "That's enough. Everyone turned. Ms. Patricia Walsh, the vice principal, stood at the cafeteria entrance, her expression thunderous. Behind her, two security guards moved into the room with purpose. "Mr. Vaughan, Mr. Cole, Mr. Martinez, my office. Now, the rest of you, lunch is over. Get to your next class." The spell broke. Students erupted into motion and chatter, the volume suddenly overwhelming. Vera remained still, watching as Derek shot her a look of pure hatred before storming toward the exit. Brandon and Kyle followed, both still looking shaken. Ms. Walsh approached Vera, her expression softening slightly. "Are you all right?" Vera nodded, not trusting her voice. The adrenaline was starting to wear off, and she could feel her hands beginning to shake. "My office, please. 5 minutes. We need to talk about what just happened." As the vice principal walked away, Vera finally allowed herself to sit back down. The cafeteria was emptying, but dozens of students passed her table, and their expressions had changed. Some looked scared, some looked impressed. Some looked at her like they were seeing her for the first time. A girl with purple streaks in her hair paused at her table. "That was the most badass thing I've ever seen," she said quietly, then hurried off before Vera could respond. Vera looked down at her journal, still clutched under her arm. The torn page lay on the floor nearby. She picked it up carefully, smoothing it out. The image showed the warrior woman with the sword, facing her enemies without fear. For the first time in 9 days, for the first time in months really, Vera felt something other than grief. She felt the possibility of strength, of survival, of maybe, eventually, belonging. The storm inside her was still there, but now she knew she could control it, could direct it, could use it when necessary. Her father had given her those skills for exactly this reason. Not to hurt people, but to ensure she couldn't be hurt with impunity. As she gathered her things and headed toward the vice principal's office, Vera made herself a new promise. She would still be quiet when she chose to be. She would still draw and keep to herself, but she would never again mistake silence for weakness, would never again believe that making herself small would keep her safe. The girl in her drawings, standing against the storm with her arms outstretched, wasn't just a fantasy, she was a possibility. And for the first time since her mother's death, Vera thought she might actually want to live long enough to become her.